Moving over to the defensive side of things, like you said last year, the defense played really, really well, but unfortunately, they lose 8 of their top 10 tacklers from a year ago. We'll get to the individual kind of units here in a second, but how did that overall defensive unit look in the spring?
Yeah, they're trying to get their goal in the spring is to get a lot of reps for players, right? And when you lose that much experience from your defense and guys have been there since, for their 2, 3 year starters, you want to get a lot of people reps, and you're going to find some guys that kind of step up um, in the spring. And they got a lot of holes to fill. They got a lot of holes to fill and at really important positions. And I will say this: Nate Woody has done a really good job with finding the right players for the specific positions in this defense. He's an underrated defensive coordinator. I tell you that. He doesn't get a lot of credit for what he works with year in and year out. Yeah, last year they had some experience back on defense, but they still had some unproven players that had to get the job done. And he found a really good nose tackle in Kyle Lewis. So I mean, he's a good coach, and the schemes seem to work. Blitzes are pretty consistent. They really need some help in the defensive backfield with all the graduation losses. So we'll see. That's going to be a big key for them if they can hold up their end on the backside. We'll see. There's a little bit more questions certainly on the defensive side than the offensive side.
Well, luckily, one of those parts of the defense that held up best with losing players was that defensive line. At least in terms of returning production, they do return Kyle Lewis and Jack Latour and Trey Sophia and others. How did that unit look in the spring? And did anyone stand out?
Yeah, they kind of like to rotate their defensive line. They probably play up to 9 defensive linemen in games last year. So yeah, their starters were on the field, but like they rotated 2 nose tackles in last year, and then the defensive ends were 5 or 6 a game. So guys like Andre Miller, who is a senior this year, got to get some pretty valuable minutes in that time, especially in the Navy game. I believe he was on the field and caused the fumble at the end of the game. I think the year before he was on the field too and caused the fumble. It was involved at the end of the game too. He's a guy who he wasn't sure he was going to play football again after last year against Syracuse. He was taken away on a stretcher, friendly fire contact. He was okay. He was released, I think, that night or early the next morning. Took him a couple games to get back, but he's a guy definitely who Army fans should look out for this year on the defensive line. Cody Weineker has a really good story. Cody Weineker is probably their number 2 nose tackle right now behind Kyle Lewis. He's a guy who had to leave West Point. His academics weren't great. He had to leave, and he went to serve in the Army for about a year at Fort Drum. And he went through a program where if he did everything that he was supposed to do up there, that he could reapply to West Point. And he reapplied to West Point, and the football team took him in. And last year he saw sparing playing time too. But this year, his teammates voted him one of 4 captains for the 2024 season. So that tells you the impact that this guy. It chokes me up a little bit because those stories are like that. You're not going to get them anywhere else in the country. Those stories about Cody Weineker, a guy who, got a second chance, basically, is making the most of it. And for him to be voted captain to lead this team as one of 4 captains. And then he's going to, during the spring game, he's out there with the starting, first team. Kyle Lewis didn't play in the spring game, just holding them out. And he's getting the reps there. He's gotten the reps in the spring. So he's definitely a guy you want to take a look at. Sophia, mostly like an outside linebacker edge guy that they're going to probably move around a little bit. I think you might see him at defensive end. You might see him on the edge. It's a passing situation. They might go 2 down defensive lineman or 1 down defensive lineman, have him up or down. He's 6'6". He's 250 pounds. It's his time. It's Trey's time to make some plays. It's his senior year, and I think those are the guys to watch out for in the defensive line.
Moving over to the linebackers, they lose their leader and leading tackler, who we talked about earlier and showed some highlights of, Leo Lowen, as well as Jimmy Carlo and Jackson Powell. They do return Caleb Fortner and Brett Garina, among others. How did they look in the spring, and did anyone kind of step up from a leadership standpoint, or even up like kind of taking over that Leo Lowen role?
Yeah, this is where the competition is pretty high. I mean, there's a lot of competition for positions. I mean, Leo Lowen, standout. Jimmy Charlo. I mean, the guy got signed as an undrafted free agent by the Jets and was in Jets rookie camp over the weekend. So he really talented players, really guys who IQ off the charts, just IQ off the charts on the football field. Lowen was a finalist, for the academic Heisman. Guys that it's hard to replace. And so you got Caleb Fortner, who stepped in last year. I want to say it was the Syracuse game where he got his first start because Spencer Jones, the senior, got hurt, and he started the rest of the way. He had the big strip sack against Navy in the return for a touchdown. He was all over the field. Once he got his feet down, playing inside linebacker alongside Lowen. Now he's the next inside linebacker for Army. They've had a ton of them. You can go back to Monken's days with Andrew King, Jeremy Tiff, James Nautical, Cole Christensen, John Radigan. I'm missing some guys too. I mean, now you have Leo Lowen, and now you have Caleb Fortner. Who's going to play beside Caleb Fortner on the inside? And then Thomas is a guy who was a sophomore, a little banged up last year, got some time. He was running number 1 at the end of spring camp, but Brett Arena's right on his tail. And Brett Arena's a guy who plays on third downs for Army last year as like a kind of pass rush specialist, so to speak. Maybe a little undersized, but a heck of a motor. And he's a guy who's definitely, I could say, has been a guy who stepped up in the leadership role for the linebacking room. He's going to be a senior. So, I mean, he's accepted that responsibility. I mean, on the outside there, they like Eric Ford on the edge. They like Eric Ford on the edge to play like not the Jimmy Charlo position, the Jackson Powell position as the dog, they call it, where Andre Carter used to play. And they have Casey Larkin, who was a safety last year, that they're moving to Jimmy Charlo's position, which is like a combination line nickelback. It's basically a nickelback nickelback that Casey Larkin, who played in some meaningful snaps, giving him a shot too. They have some talent there. It's just a matter of what the young talent's going to step up, and that's going to be determined in the preseason, some of that stuff. So, to be honest with you,
well, talking about Casey Larkin, they do bring back him and Max Didomenic, but this
DiDomenico.
They do suffer a lot of losses here on this side of the defense. Quindrillin Hammonds, Jabari Moore, Cameron Jones, and Bo Nicholas Paul, all no longer there. Who stepped up in the spring to take over these vacated roles, and how do they look?
Yeah, that's some big shoes to fill, especially at cornerback when you lose your top 3 corners and all guys were seniors and all guys were multiple year starters. Jabari Moore, I think, ended up with 57 career starts. He was a 5-year guy. Donovan Platt's a corner that had started his freshman year a little bit when guys were nicked up and banged up. He didn't really get into the mix until later his sophomore year, and he's a guy who has experience. So they're going to ask a lot of Donovan Platt this year in this junior year. And they have a couple other guys who are getting, they just don't have the reps. They're the guys have seen special teams work, but they haven't received time yet in big games. Jaden Mays is a guy who's going to be a sophomore, who's right now the starting corner, and he'll be pushed by Jordan Weaver, who's a junior who played a lot of special teams last year, pretty athletic. A player named Jackson Hammond is a guy that really high on, maybe one of the quickest players on the team. He's going into his sophomore year. He's also a sprinter on the Army track team. And as of this taping today, was a part of the Patriot League winning 4x100 relay team. So, I mean, a guy who has some speed, brings some ball hawking skills to the corner position. I think I'm probably missing one of the other guys coming up too. I'll try to remember him in a second. And safety, Max DiDomenico is one of the, again, good football IQ, always around the ball. probably one of their best football players, a guy who was recruited as a quarterback, who they moved to safety, and has just been a really good fit for Max. That second position is kind of up for grabs. They have a sophomore, going to be a sophomore, Steve Naduzzi, who played corner as a freshman, saw a snap or two in games, but now they want him to pretty much step up and take that second position, and he'll be battling senior Aaron Bibbins for that spot. So those are two guys to watch for there. It'd be interesting there. I mean, you never know. A freshman might come in and earn at least maybe a backup role behind Max or something like that. Maybe they have some talent coming in to kind of fill the depth on that side, but it's definitely one of their question marks, no doubt. So real quick, I'm sorry, guys. I left out somebody that in that Elo Madozi is a guy who they're really high on as like an edge rusher. He's going to be a sophomore. He's 6'3". He's probably 230 pounds. He's very athletic. Had a sack in a game earlier in the season, his freshman year. He's going to be a guy with Eric Ford to battle for that edge spot, and kind of look for him to be a name to watch out for too. I apologize. His name escaped me. The Army football brain. It's was going on overload. So I apologize for that.
Oh, you're good, man. Happens to all of us. If you had to pick a defensive player to kind of have a breakout type season in 2024, and it seems like there's plenty of opportunity for some guys, who would that be?
It might be Madozi, because if they can get they want to get some pass rush off the edge, right? And sometimes the three defensive linemen aren't going to generate. That's not really the kind of they blitz a lot. So the pass rushing is not necessarily the Army defensive lineman's game. It's more like controlling the gaps to set up the blitzes, alleys for the blitzes to work. And if Madozi can have that burst off the edge and provide some pressure, I think that's going to be key. He's very talented. They're very high on him. So I probably just should have saved my answer. I should have saved my my breakdown of him there. But I mean, he's a guy that they're really high on. So I expect him to really do some good things this year.